A glimpse of the Environment Protection Act for 2017. And I asked the question, why is it 2017? Well, that's when they first brought it in, and then it needs to be passed and come into. So don't worry about the date. All right, here we go. So it's a look at the significance of the new EPA and why it is changing. And we're going to go through the all of the modules that are on the site. So why do we have a new act? In Victoria, the new EPA of 2017, as amended by the EPA 2018, or the Act of 2018, will do what all laws should do, evolve with us as a society. It includes new ways of thinking and doing for protecting human health and the environment. And this means a shift from addressing issues once they happen to doing things to prevent issues from happening. So as duty holders in Victoria, it's your responsibility to understand your obligations under the new laws and how they apply to your business. Victoria's Environment Protection Authority, the EPA, monitors people and businesses to ensure compliance with obligations of the Environment Protection Act of 2017. So new principles will be integrated into every decision the EPA makes. Courts will also consider these same principles when making their decisions. And those principles are waste management hierarchy, proportionality, prevention, shared responsibility, polluter pays, generational equality, precautionary, and the integration of environmental, social, and economic considerations. So a taste of what's new. Under the Environment Protection Act of 2017, there will be new and updated duties, permissions, and notices. So let's look at some duties. The duties form a key part of the new Environment Protection Act of 2017. The general environmental duty is one everyone needs to be familiar with, but there are others. So let's look at the GED. The duty arises when there is a risk of harm from pollution or waste. So you must minimize those risks so far as reasonably practicable. The GED applies to everyone. And while we're on the GED, what I want to do is play a short video that summarizes it from the EPA itself. So what I'm going to do is stop that share and change, because I couldn't load it specifically. If I go now to here, just bear with me. And I'll play this, and it's only 2 minutes 20. So this says it way better than what I can.
The General Environmental Duty, or GED, is a new concept for Victoria's environment protection laws and transforms environment protection regulation. Let's start by reading the actual wording of the GED. A person who is engaging in an activity that may give rise to risks of harm to human health or the environment from pollution or waste must minimise those risks so far as reasonably practicable. The GED is understanding your risks and minimising them. Responsibility for this comes in the form of a duty and the duty holder. The duty will create a requirement for businesses and individuals to take action. The duty holder is the person or persons responsible for carrying out a particular duty. A person engaging in an activity that attracts a duty includes any person who is conducting, undertaking, managing, or in control of that activity. From a regulatory perspective, the person in control of an activity has the primary responsibility for preventing harm. Whilst EPA's focus is on enforcing this with businesses, the duty gives us all a similar responsibility as citizens to take this responsibility for our own actions. EPA will now focus on working with duty holders within businesses of all sizes to help them understand and carry out their duties. The starting point is to identify hazards and assess the risks from their activities. Sounds complicated? It doesn't have to be. Compliance with the GED can be managed via a simple 4-step process. 1. The duty holder needs to understand the risks of harm that pollution or waste from their activities might present to human health or the environment. 2. The way those risks can be eliminated or otherwise controlled need to be identified and understood. 3. Where risk cannot be eliminated, duty holders are required to put in place all control measures that are reasonably practicable to reduce the likelihood of harm arising. 4. From time to time, or when circumstances change, duty holders need to review the risks from their activities and the effectiveness of the risk control measures in place to ensure they are working and are not outdated.
So we're talking about duties. The second one on here is the duty to take action. Duty arises when a pollution incident occurs that causes or threatens to cause harm to human health or the environment. If an activity you undertake is responsible for a pollution incident, you must restore affected areas back to their original state so far as reasonably practicable. Duty to notify of notifiable incident. Duty arises when a pollution incident occurs that causes or threatens to cause material harm. If you run a business that causes a pollution incident, you may have a duty to report this to the EPA. Duties relating to contaminated land. There's a duty in relation to managing contaminated land, regardless of who caused the contamination or when. If you're managing or controlling land, you have an obligation to manage the contamination risks. There's also a duty to notify the EPA of contamination above prescribed thresholds. Duty relating to industrial waste. There are duties to make sure industrial waste are only taken to a lawful place. Each party in the chain of supply, producers, transporters, and receivers, have a duty. And the last one here is there are duties to make sure priority waste is managed appropriately, transported in permitted vehicles, and tracked as appropriate. There's also a duty to investigate alternatives to waste disposals. There's your duties. Well, no, let's talk a little bit about waste duties as well. What is the waste framework? So the Environment Protection Act of 2017, the Act, and the Environment Protection Regs, regulations, set up the legal framework for regulation of waste. The General Environment Duty, GED, which I talked about, will require duty holders to identify and implement reasonably practicable controls to eliminate or minimize the risks associated with waste management. In addition to the GED, the legislation introduces a new framework to specifically focus on reducing risks from the management of waste while supporting waste material reuse, recovery, and resource efficiency. It also establishes strong penalties for waste dumping. So what are the duties? The framework includes a set of waste duties, as well as helping to manage risks. These obligations will help ensure the resource value of waste has the best chance of being recovered and that waste does not become a problem for others to manage. This means that producers of industrial waste must take reasonable steps to ensure the waste will be transported to a place authorised to receive industrial waste. Receivers in industrial waste must be authorised to do so, and those who deposit industrial waste must also do so at a place authorised to receive industrial waste. So the duty and the GED, why do we need waste duties alongside the GED? To mitigate residual risks of harm that the GED alone may not address, to provide certainty of risk control measures for high-risk activities, to target mismanagement of waste, to address issues related to waste transformation and resource recovery, and to encourage waste minimisation and recovery. And there is a waste supply chain that follows the waste from production to authorised receiver. The Act and regulations set out obligations at 3 distinct points in the supply chain, and they are classification, transportation, and lawful place. So there are your duties. Permissions. So an introduction to permissions. Permissions also a key part of the new Environment Protection Act of 2017. The new Environment Protection Regs, the regulations, will prescribe the activities that will require a permission and the type of permission it will need. So first one there is development license. required to initiate construction, installation, or modification of higher risk development activities. Operating license, required to operate a higher risk activity. Pilot project license, required to initiate a research, development, or demonstration activity. Permit is applied to moderate risk activities, high risk, low complexity activities requiring standard assessment processes and ongoing conditions. Last one there is registration, which is self-assessed, automatically granted, may have some basic conditions and a declaration of being fit and proper. So they're the permissions and some notices. Under the new Act, there are different types of notices for different circumstances, with a common notice being the improvement notice. This notice helps bring someone into compliance with a duty that they hold under the Act. So the notices are: improvement notice helps bring someone into compliance with a duty. Prohibition notice permits a person from an activity that poses an immediate risk. Notice to investigate requires investigation of pollution, waste, or risk of harm. Environmental action notice: clean up, cease accepting industrial waste, or reduce stockpiles of waste. A site management order imposes long-term management on a site. Non-disturbance notice, used to preserve evidence of a contravention at a site. Information gathering notice and waste information gathering notice requires information or documents to be provided to the EPA. Waste abatement notice requires removal of waste, and directions addresses immediate risks. All right, let's move on to remedial powers. So the module introduces the EPA's remedial powers, and these are questions throughout. There are questions throughout to help check one's understanding. So what businesses need to know regarding remedial powers? Remedy is not about punishment. Remedy is about fixing a problem or redressing a wrong. In other words, coming up with a remedy for a given situation. The new laws are principle-based legislation that allowed EPA to ensure duty holders take action to minimise risks of harm to human health and the environment from pollution and waste, rather than simply reacting to actual harm. A duty holder has a duty to minimise risks associated with their activities. EPA's objectives is that they voluntarily initiate remedial actions without waiting for a notice or other intervention by the EPA. EPA uses a range of remedial tools to address harm, change behaviour, drive improved performance, and raise the state of knowledge about protecting the environment and human health. So here we have on the right-hand side, three things. It comes in as non-compliance with the Act, regulations, or permission. Let me just say that again. So let's find out when the remedial powers are required. Non-compliance with the Act, regulations, or permission, risk to harm to human health or the environment from pollution or waste, and the land is or may be contaminated. What considerations guide remedial powers? The new laws give EPA a range of powers to use to ensure duty holders attain compliance and mitigate harm. EPA approach compliance and enforcement according to the following principles. First one is timely. The EPA seeks to address risks where harm is likely, as well as responding to harm which has already occurred. Targeted. Remedial notices usually address a single issue or harm. Where there are multiple issues, multiple remedial powers may be applied. Corrective. Remedial powers are not used as sanctioning tools. They're used to fix rather than to punish. Transparent. Where appropriate, details from remedial notices may be available in databases that are publicly available. And enforceable. Where the EPA exercises remedial powers, they will follow up to confirm compliance with the remedy. So what remedial powers are available? The EPA has access to a range of tools to remedy situations depending on the severity of the issue. So compliance advice, notice of orders, directions, cleanup, civil remedies, and enforceable undertakings. So you notice and orders, now that you're aware of the remedial remedies available, let's take a deeper look at the notices. So the notice and orders, a remedial notice is a written statutory instrument which is used to ensure a duty holder is compliant. That first one there is improvement notice, which helps bring someone into compliance with a general environmental duty and other duties. Prohibition notice prohibits a person from engaging in an activity that poses an immediate risk. Notice to investigate requires investigation of pollution, contaminated land, waste, or risk of harm. Whilst not strictly remedial in itself, a notice to investigate is often a precursor to an environmental action notice. Environmental action notice: clean up, cease accepting industrial waste or reduce stockpiles of waste. Site management order imposes long-term management obligations on a site and can include long-term or passive remedial actions. And waste abatement notice, it requires the removal of waste. Next one is what is reasonably practicable. Under the new environmental laws, 3 duties require you to minimize or respond to risks as far as reasonably practicable. We'll take you through things to consider when determining what is reasonably practicable in your circumstance. Eliminate first. Start by considering how you can eliminate the risks of harm to human health and the environment from your activities. Identifying ways to eliminate risk is best done before you commence the activity. Use what opportunities you have to make risk elimination one of your goals during design. If it is not reasonably practicable to eliminate the risks, you must consider how you can reduce the risks. General guidance on assessing your risks and preventing harm to human health and the environment available on the EPA website. And there's a hierarchy of controls. You can use the hierarchy as a guide to measures that can be taken or implemented. So you've got eliminate the hazard, you've got substitute the hazard, and you've got administrative controls. Likelihood. Consider the likelihood or chance of a harm occurring. The greater the likelihood, the greater it's important when working out what is reasonably practicable. And you can understand the likelihood or chance by considering how often the activity that created the harm takes place, whether an event has occurred on your site, whether the harm has commonly occurred on other sites, or information from suppliers and manufacturers. Degree. Consider the degree, also referred to as consequence or impact on people or the environment of the harm. So consider the degree of the harm. The degree of harm carries more importance in especially sensitive environments, such as when you are near to neighbours or a creek. Under the Act, harm includes any adverse impact on human health or the environment of any degree or duration. Your knowledge of the risks, you're required to have and seek out knowledge about the risks your activities pose to the environment and human health. You're also required to know how to address them. The knowledge of a duty holder's actions will be addressed the knowledge of a duty holder's actions will be assessed against includes both what you actually know and what someone in their circumstance should reasonably know about the risks. Together, these form a state of knowledge. All right, so the knowledge of risks, and you've got all of these here. Industrial associations can provide information about new hazards and risks specific to an industry. Insurance providers can provide useful information about hazards and ways of controlling risks. Safety data sheets often provide useful information about hazards to human health or environment associated with the product and ways of controlling risks. Technical fire, health and safety and environmental specialists, manufacturers and suppliers can provide information about hazards associated with plant, substances and processes. and trade waste arrangements for the site. So changing state of knowledge. The state of knowledge on the risks of harm to human health and environment improve over time. New knowledge on risks arises and new opportunities for better managed risks arise through new and more affordable technology and techniques. Changes in state of knowledge may occur when the extent of risks become more widely understood or ways of controlling risks improve, changes, or becomes more cost effective. Availability and suitability. This requires consideration of what is available and also what is suitable for the elimination or minimization of risk. This doesn't just mean there's a risk control equipment available to purchase. It can also mean that it is feasible to implement a work process change. Available. A way to eliminate or reduce a hazard or risk is generally available if it is feasible to purchase or manufacture the control measure, or where it is a work process it is feasible to implement in your circumstances. So that's available. Suitable. A way to eliminate or reduce a hazard or risk is generally suitable if it is effective in eliminating or reducing the likelihood or degree of harm from a hazard or risk, does not introduce new or higher risks having regard to all the circumstances, and is a practical measure given the circumstances in which the hazard or risk exists. And cost. The cost of a specific solution that reduces the risk of harm must be considered against the reduction it could achieve. Importantly, the most effective solution won't always be the most expensive. Likewise, a cheaper solution may not always be the most effective available to control the risk. You are likely to have met your duty to a reasonably practicable standard when you can demonstrate that increasing your resources to reduce the risk would not result in any meaningful further reduction of that risk. For example, here's one on cost. Patsy is a suburban pub that plays live music. Patsy hires a consultant to advise on ways to minimize noise pollution. The consultant advises they could raise the sound wall at the back of the property 1 meter to cut the neighbour's line of sight and reduce sound by almost a half. He also tells them they could further reduce it by an additional 3 decibels if they extended it another 3 meters, but then this would make the wall so high that it would have costly construction requirements, and the noise reduction would only just be perceptible. So what does the concept of reasonably practical include? So you got eliminating, degree, no, cost, likelihood, and suitability. I'll just run through them. The blank of the risks eventuating, the blank of harm that would reduce if the risks eventuated, what you blank or reasonably know about the harm or risk of harm, and any ways of blank or reducing those risks, the availability and blank of ways to eliminate or reduce those risks, and the blank of eliminating or reducing those risks. Which of those would you put in? Yes, correct. Here we go. The likelihood of the risks eventuating, the degree of harm, what you know or ought reasonably know, and any ways of eliminating or reducing those risks, the availability and suitability of ways to eliminate, and the cost of eliminating or reducing those risks. All right, we've got about 18 minutes to go because I want to keep you on time for those who know how I present. So I want to keep you on time, about 18 minutes. Let's look at waste classification. And this particular document, Waste Classification Assessment Protocol, is available on the EPA website. It's under documents. So if you want to go there and have a further look, I would encourage it. So there's a couple of stories here. Mada's story about mirror codes. Waste classification. Under the Environment Protection Act, duty holders have a duty to classify their waste in accordance to in accordance with the updated classification system. The EPA plays an important role in assisting duty holders to implement this new system. You need to be familiar with the classification system so you can determine if waste has been classified correctly for management or disposal. So Vinny, as an accredited consigner, helps support duty holders and assist them in verifying if they use the right process to classify their waste. And there are 3 duty holders Vinny needs to help: Marty, Clay, and Dina, as they attempt to correctly classify the types of waste generated by their businesses. So Marty's story: what changes have been made to classifications? We'll get to Marty in a tick. So the regs aim to make classification easier and more accurate. The framework places a strong emphasis on pre-classifying waste to reduce the need for sampling and costly and time-consuming analysis. One of the key differences is the creation of mirror codes. Some wastes are potentially hazardous in some circumstances, but not in others. A mirror code is a variation of the standard waste code used to indicate that the waste has additional controls and requirements to the non-hazardous variant. Another key change is a more detailed, unique code for your waste, which includes mirror codes. This is a concise way of representing the type of waste your business generates, how hazardous it is, and how it needs to be managed and disposed of. And there are 4 elements: the waste code, including mirror codes if applicable, waste form, waste types, and disposal category. All right, waste common types and their classification codes. Waste classification system reduces the risk of harm to human health and the environment by providing clear and consistent guidelines for those who control or manage waste. Marty works at a timber sawmill. He understands that waste needs to be classified to determine how it should be managed or disposed of in order to prevent harm to human health or the environment. He's keen to comply with the rules, but still has a few questions about the changes. In other words, why have these changes been made? The new approach, including a higher reliance on a pre-classified list, has been developed so that it's clearer and less burdensome for businesses like yours to classify their waste. The regulations and protocols provide you with clear and consistent information in order to standardize classification methodologies, enable you to fulfill your waste duties, and help the EPA to enforce industrial and priority waste controls to help to prevent harm to human health and the environment. How will this process help me? So classifying waste in this way help you to understand your waste and the risk it poses, identify the relevant management controls and waste duties that apply to your waste, decide how to manage your waste, identify where your waste can be sent, identify if your waste needs to be tracked, record the required information for waste tracking, provide the required information to others in the waste supply chain who also need to fulfill their duties. The Environment Protection Regs Section 5, it's time, like I needed to go and find this, so I'd encourage everyone to do that. Familiarise yourself with the Schedule 5 of Environment Protection Regs. Let's begin with the waste codes to help Marty to locate the appropriate waste code for his waste. Schedule 5 of the regulations lists the waste codes for different types of waste. Some common waste types and their corresponding codes are shown here, like e-waste is T300, glass is Z100, plastic is Z500, and acids in solid form B100. So the assignment of codes: Marty visits the Victorian legislation or EPA's webpage to get a copy of the Environment Protection Regs. He searches for timber and finds his waste is listed in Schedule 5. Marty notes there are 2 potential codes that is waste timber could use, K310H and K310NH. The reason that there are 2 codes is, in this instance, is there are some wastes that are potentially hazardous in some circumstances, but not in others. For this reason, they are assigned a mirror code. The hazardous variant is denoted by the H and the non-hazardous as an NH. Marty also remembers Vinny telling him there is a waste classification assessment protocol. He decides to search this document too and locates a section with relevant information about timber. Marty sees that whether his timber is treated or not determines whether his waste is classified as industrial or priority waste. So Marty is going great guns and has managed to complete 3 of the 4 waste classification elements for both forms of waste. So waste code, waste form, waste classification, and disposal category. So waste code. The waste code is a 4-character code that corresponds to a particular type of waste. Waste types are grouped in sections: cyanides, acids, alkaline wastes, etc. Each section is assigned a different letter. The subgroups of waste in each section begin with a section letter, but will have a unique number. For example, inorganic chemicals, waste codes begin with D, like D120. Pesticides, waste code beginning with H, H100, or retestable organic waste codes begin with K, like K140. Waste form, the element describes the physical state of the waste. Categories are S for solid, L for liquid, P for sludge, and M for mixture, a mixture of clinical waste and laboratory chemicals as an example. And the types. Waste types help those in management or control of waste to understand how to manage it in order to minimize the risk of harm to human health and environment, as well as to find opportunities to reuse the waste. These 3 waste types are covered in the waste duties learning module, and these make up the third of the waste classification elements. That is industrial waste, IW, priority waste, PW, and reportable priority waste. Disposal category. The disposal category forms the new component of the waste classification elements. The waste disposal category must be assigned to all priority and reportable priority waste so that everyone in the supply chains knows, and reportable priority waste so that everyone in the supply chain knows how the waste is to be correctly disposed of. The following categories apply to waste consigned for disposal and contaminated soil. Category A, B, C, D is soils only, and asbestos and contaminated soil. Check Schedule 6 of the regs for a definition of each category. Disposal category and mirror code. Marty and Vinny discuss a new waste classification assessment protocol. As Vinny starts to leave, Marty calls Vinny back as he has 2 more questions. How do I work out the disposal category for my waste? And the information can be found in Schedule 6 of the Environment Protection Regs and the waste disposal categories, characteristics and thresholds, and the waste classification assessment protocol documents. It's important for you to determine which mirror code applies to your waste, as this will have an impact on how it will be managed. And the second question is, my waste code in Schedule 5 has a mirror code. Can you give me more info on what this is? A small section of the waste types found in Schedule 5 require an additional waste classification element to be added. This is because they are potentially hazardous in some circumstances, but not in others. Before the waste can be classified, this additional classification needs to be understood, as it often changes the waste type, for example, industrial waste or priority waste. In this instance, you'll need to use the waste classification assessment protocol to conduct a hazardous properties assessment to determine if your waste is a hazardous or non-hazardous variant. Hazardous variants will be assigned an H, non-hazardous will be assigned NH. So mirror code example, drilling mud also requires a mirror code because it sometimes be contaminated with compounds that are hazardous. So sometimes drilling mud can be contaminated with hydraulic fluid, and sometimes it's not contaminated. So if it's contaminated with hydraulic fluids, it would be a T130H, which is reportable priority waste. But if it's not contaminated, it'd be T130NH as priority waste. A bit on clay as an example. Clay's another conscientious duty holder who, like Marty, would like some assistance with classifying his waste. Marty is fortunate as his waste is pre-classified, so he's not required to take any further action. However, Clay isn't so lucky. Clay calls Vinny to say that he's really struggling to try and classify some of his waste. As Vinny is an accredited consigner, he can provide Clay with some help. So identification of pre-classified waste. As part of Vinny's role as an accredited consigner, he can help Clay by making him aware of the Schedule 5 of the regs. After much discussion with Clay and searches on the Schedule 5, Vinny can't seem to find a suitable match either. If there was an entry for Clay's waste, the question on the table is, how would we identify that it was pre-classified? And this particular one it's column 5. It's pre-classified or mirror code. All right, waste classification assessment protocol. Vinny was not able to confirm an appropriate waste code using the pre-classified codes. He provided advice to Clay on how to classify the waste using criteria in table 2 of the waste classification assessment protocol. He also provided Clay advice on where transport of the waste could require compliance with waste tracking and permitting requirements. All right, so normally in using table 2, select the waste classification from the list and hit submit. And that one is reportable priority waste. And a real quick one on Dina. As an example, meet Dina. She's the owner of a major construction company and is the last of our 3 duty holders to reach out to Vinny. Dina advises that the first waste she'd like to discuss is petrol sludge. She has completed 3 of the 4 waste classification elements currently, but would like Vinny to double check. You can refer to Schedule 5 of the Environment Protection Regs on the EPA's website for more detail about waste disposal categories. Vinny helps Dina understand the characteristics of her waste, which is petrol, which appears on a pre-classified list. The waste code is G100. Waste classification is reportable priority waste. The transport of the waste type needs to be reported to the EPA, and the company transporting the waste needs a permission to transport it. And the final part of the waste classification elements is the waste disposal category. Under the regs, where disposal of the priority waste and reportable priority waste is unavoidable, then these wastes and soils sourced from contaminated land, soils that contain any sort of contaminant or create a hazard, must be further categorized. This is in order to know where waste can be appropriately disposed of. Unless the category is determined by other regulations, the disposal category can be determined using the criteria and thresholds outlined in the waste disposal category. See also Schedule 6 of the regulations, called characteristics and threshold documents. Take a moment and find this key document and familiarize yourself. Probably not now, but that's an important one. So disposal categories and priority waste and reportable priority waste that are destined for landfill, as well as contaminated soils, must be further categorized for disposal. Solid industrial waste have 4 hazard categories and soils have 6. You'll notice that there are 2 new waste disposal categories that apply only to soil. And Dina has some additional questions for Vinny about the new soil waste disposal categories. So category D is new. What is it and why is it needed? Are there any duty holder requirements to store category D soil. I have a construction site that has soil only contaminated with asbestos. Can I manage it in the same way as category D? And what sort of material does the fill material category cover? Oh, don't have my answers. Okay, waste lawful place. Waste lawful place. This is waste lawful place as a diagram, and I should run through it because we've got a couple of minutes. So the Act definition, industrial waste means waste arising from commercial, industrial, or trade activities, or from laboratories, or waste prescribed to an industrial waste for the purpose of this definition. And the definition is the following waste is prescribed to be industrial waste, waste from any source received at a place or premises which stores or handles waste generated at another location for the purpose of resource recovery or off-site transfer or disposal, and waste is transported for fee or reward other than the collection of curbside waste by or on behalf of a council or a waste and recovery resource recovery group. So who's responsible for it? You've got an accredited, I'll skip over these because it's quite in-depth, but you've got an accredited consigner, a waste producer, a waste transporter, and a waste receiver. And then you've got what happens to it. You've got preparation for reuse in relation to waste means the use of the waste for a purpose that is the same or similar to the purpose for which it was used before it became waste. For example, bricks from a construction site may need to be cleaned of residual mortar before they can be used again in construction. Reuse and recycle. This option is available for low hazardous industrial waste, and the use may be immediate use for resource recovery, applied to land in certain circumstances, or treated and or used on site. It is also the preferred action for non-hazardous industrial waste, which have good recovery potential. Recycling, where preferable to producing landfill waste, should be the second priority after reusing. Then you've got second part of that is recycling means turning an item into raw materials which can be used again, usually for a completely new product, which is energy consuming. This is an energy consuming procedure. Reusing refers to using an object as it is without treatment. This reduces pollution and waste, thus making it a more sustainable process. Examples of recycled items include fiberglass made from glass bottles, insulation materials made from newspaper, or plastic bottles and shopping trolleys made from milk bottles. Reused items include anything that can be reused for the original purpose. Examples for reuse include items bought secondhand, often furniture and clothing. Containment and treatment. So category A waste may be transported with an appropriate authorization. It is too hazardous to dispose of and must be treated to a lower hazard category before it can be disposed. Treatment, hazardous waste may be able to be treated to reduce their hazard levels. These include processes like thermal treatment, bioremediation, chemical or physical treatment, etc. Once the levels of the hazard has been reduced, they can be moved to another site authorized to receive treated waste. And disposal. Disposal usually refers to taking the waste to landfill. This option is available for waste other than category A waste. It's the least preferable option for managing waste. Disposal includes burning, burial at landfill sites, etc., or at sea. And this is quite complex. I'll just click through it so you can see it. You've got who cannot receive industrial waste. You've got declaration of use. You've got waste determination. How are they authorized to receive it? You've got Reg 63 times 4. You've got permission required. You've got permission exemptions. And you've got S48 determinations. You've also got emergency disposals. They're quite intricate, and I encourage you to find that one on the EPA. Of course, you've got emergency and temporary relief. We can only issue an authorization of this nature for the purpose of meeting a temporary emergency or providing for a temporary relief to a public nuisance or community hardship, or enabling repair or dismantling of any item of plant or equipment. And the EPA anticipate that the use of these powers will be infrequent and that applicants may need to consider seeking approval through existing permissions. An example of this might be where a bushfire has destroyed many homes and a small local landfill site needs urgent authorization to receive the waste from contractors clearing sites, which may include asbestos and hazardous waste. And again, found this on the EPA website, the waste disposal categories, characteristics and thresholds. And we are so close to the end, so bear with me, we're a couple of minutes over, but I've just got 5 questions, which will just wrap it all up and bring it into a loop. The new Environment Protection Act of 2017 is doing what all laws should do: reflect community needs and expectations of the time. Is that true or false? I'm sure you're all answering the question and shouting at the screen. The answer is true. That's right. The acts are passed, repealed, and amended regularly to reflect the contemporary needs of society. A lot's changed in Victoria since the Environment Protection Act of 1970 was introduced. The new Environment Protection Act of 2017 reflects the expectation of the Victorian community. Second question, which of these terms below is not a principle of the Environment Protection Act of 2017? Proportionality, reaction, precautionary, or polluter pays? And you all answered reaction, of course. Duty holders in the EPA will still need to react to pollution incidents, but a principle of the Act is prevention rather than reaction. The GED is central to this, as you must reduce the risk of any activities which may harm the environment or human health through pollution or waste. Question number 3. If your business was storing oil in a tank that is rusting or there's no bunding to prevent leakage ending up in the nearby stormwater drain, what duty would you be non-compliant with? Duty to manage, GED, duty to notify, or duty to take action? Correct. The general environmental duty. That's right. If you're engaged in an activity which may cause harm to the environment from pollution or waste, you must minimize those risks or may be non-compliant with the GED. And second last question, which description best represents registration? Self-assessed, automatically granted, may have some basic conditions and a declaration of being fit and proper, or required to initiate construction, installation or modification, higher risk development activities. Yes, the top one. That's right. Registration of the new type of permission in the Environment Protection Act of 2017 that allows you to legally operate an industrial or waste activity that has low or moderate risk. An example of an activity that needs a registration is a dry cleaning business. The other description was a development license. And the last question, there are different types of different notices for different circumstances. So you've got clean up, cease accepting industrial waste and reduce stockpile. You've got to help bring someone into compliance with a duty, and you've got requires information or documents to be provided to the EPA. Which one fits where? You've all got it because you've paid attention, and here they are. The Environment Action Notice is about clean up, cease. Improvement Notice is help bring someone into compliance, and the Information Gathering Notice requires information or documents to be sent to the EPA. Guess what? We've reached the end. So I encourage everyone to go to the website, epa.vic.gov.au, because on there is a stack of information. Again, comes into play as of 1 July, even has air quality and everything you need to know about the new laws. There's a webinar on there as well. And that, ladies and jelly beans, gentlemen, is the end of my presentation, and I'm going to give it back to Christina. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. I hope it's of value. Any other further questions, please ask those wonderful people at the EPA.